Every peace has come at a moment of clarity. It's like that moment where the light turns on in your mind and something fundamentally shifts in your life. And for me, these moments of clarity often turn into tattoos. The first piece I ever got was when I got clear on my relationship with Katie. And I wanted to love her at my highest capacity. And it was the realization that for us to fully love each other, we had to learn to love God more and more. The second piece was for the kids. You know, these boys were growing up right in front of my eyes, but for me, I often live in the future. It's just how I'm wired. And so while I'm out several months putting together plans and strategies, there was the danger of missing what was happening right in front of me. When it came time to get my sleeve, it was when I was getting really clear on the purpose of the ecclesia, what we call the church or the movement of Jesus, and how we're called to be this bright light. But our light is only powerful really when we take it into the darkness. If we are not meeting people in the greatest storms of their life, then we're missing out on the full purpose of what God has for us. And so it's been a while since I got another tattoo, but over the last few years, I got a new piece of clarity that has been incredibly important for my life. You know, anxiety is something that I never really dealt with growing up. Didn't have a lot of fears, didn't live with a lot of worry. In fact, the idea of anxiety was so foreign to me that people who I loved would be dealing with it, and I would give them advice like, just stop. Just stop worrying so much. Just let it go. Is pretty arrogant in retrospect, but I didn't have anything to compare it to in my own life. That was until a couple months into my marriage. It was kind of a normal day. I had been at work. I came home. I expected Katie and my stepsons, Lane and Paxton, to both be there. We had gotten married a few months earlier. It was beautiful. All four of us stood up at the altar, and what an opportunity. I wasn't just crazy in love with Katie. I was also crazy in love with these two little dudes, and we were going to become a family. It was this beautiful moment, and I got home and they weren't home. It's a little bit of a broken expectation, but not a big deal. I called Katie. She didn't answer. So I gave her some time. I called again, and again there was no answer, but this time there was like a knot that started developing in my chest. I hadn't really experienced anything like that before. And I had a realization that for some reason I'd never thought of before. It was the realization that if something were to happen to Katie, if she ever died, that not only would I lose the love of my life, but because the boys are actually my stepsons, that I would lose my entire family. And that reality sent me into a deep spiral. After 2 or 3 more calls that went unanswered, I found myself in a full panic and had difficulty breathing. I was every emotion imaginable. I was confused. I was furious. I was worried. By the time she finally got home, I was a wreck. And of course, she couldn't understand it, because it was happening deep inside of me. And that day began several years of pretty intense anxiety anytime Katie and I would be apart. If she went out of town or visited friends or family, I couldn't sleep. I would just pace. My mind would race. My heart would race. I would just eat and eat just to have something that I could control in the situation. I would live in these worst case scenarios. This all kind of came to a breaking point a couple of years ago. I was playing some camps with a band that I'm in. One night while I was laying in bed, the only way I know how to describe what happened to me is that I began to have a panic attack. It was like gravity instantly quadrupled in weight. It was just pressing me down onto the bed. I could barely breathe or think. I certainly couldn't sleep. And it was that moment that I knew I had to do something about this. I couldn't go on living this way. It was crippling. Sometimes I would think back to all of the times that I gave this great advice to just stop worrying, just stop being anxious. And now realizing it's not that simple. And I figured that it was rooted in fear. And so for the next couple of years, I began to fight my fears. And I would read all about fear, and I would get into scripture, and I would take some kind of comfort in the words of God to Joshua over and over again. Do not fear. I would try to be courageous. I wanted to be brave and faithful, but I still didn't see much relief. And one day I was all out of sorts and trying to get a hold of this part of my life, and I remembered a verse that I had known since I was a little kid. And it says, casting all your anxieties on him because he cares for you. Casting all your anxieties on God because of this great love for us that he proved to us by sending his son. I couldn't even remember the verse that it was located in the Bible, but I looked it up. I found it in 1 Peter chapter 5, verse 7, casting all your anxiety on him. And I wanted that so bad, to just throw every piece of anxiety and every fear over to God. And I thought maybe this is the starting point to dealing and getting freedom from this anxiety. But when I started really studying the verse, I found it in 1 Peter 5:7. I realized that I had a misunderstanding. In the Greek, the word casting doesn't refer to this piece by piece giving away of your anxiety. The word is actually a picture of a complete transfer of ownership of your worry from yourself to God. It's taking it once and for all, the big picture of it, and placing it all at the feet of the one who actually can do something about it. And I wanted that, to cast all that I had and transfer my ownership, but I still didn't really know how. I didn't know what it looked like. And so, like I say all the time when I'm teaching on the weekends, to really get the power of a verse of scripture, you have to look at it in its full context. And so I started reading all of 1 Peter, and what I found is that 1 Peter 5:7 is actually the middle of a sentence that starts in verse 6. It's so important. Verse 6 says, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you. It continues in verse 7 saying, casting all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And finally, I had the complete picture and the complete thought, and that was my moment of clarity. This is when the light turned on. And for the first time, I realized that I'd spent all of this time trying to fight my fears, thinking that fear was at the root of my anxiety. But in Scripture, it came alive and showed me that at the root of my anxiety was not fear, but was pride. Verse 6 says, humble yourselves. It tells you where to humble yourselves, which is under the mighty hand of God. And it also tells you how to humble yourselves. You humble yourselves by casting all of your anxiety, transferring ownership of all of these fears, all of these worries, all of the uncertainty to God. The reason that I was struggling to transfer the ownership of my anxiety, all of these worries about a future that I can't control, wasn't about fear. It wasn't about death. It wasn't about family. It was about pride. I wanted to try and retain some sense of control over a future that is uncontrollable. And so it didn't fix all of my problems immediately, But the path of humility led me towards freedom from my anxiety. Humility in relation to your anxiety is the understanding that only God has full control. Only God sees what is coming. Only God has the ultimate plan, the God whose ways are higher than our ways and whose thoughts are greater than our thoughts. Only He can see the future. The future doesn't belong to me. It's not my prerogative to try and control it. It's not my prerogative to spend my time in fear over it. At the beginning of this year, we had a class on emotional health. We call it Inside Out. And I had wanted to do something like this, and I knew that I was dealing with this anxiety and all of this intense worry. But pride will make you believe that it's more important to look healthy than to actually be healthy. It takes humility to work on the junk inside of you. I knew I needed to sign up, and so I got into a room for 12 weeks with other people who got vulnerable, who got raw. And these things that pride had kept pushed down inside of me began to be exposed to God's light. At the end of the class, we prayed a prayer to give over our control to God. In that moment, I was finally able to transfer my ownership to where it belongs, at the feet of God. And I felt for the first time in 6 years a freedom from this anxiety. I had a chance to try to prove out this new freedom shortly after our Inside Out class ended. Katie went out of town for a night, and normally my routine would be to pace and worry and get knots all in my stomach and laying in bed, eyes wide open, heart racing, living in the worst case scenarios. For the first time, I just slept. There was peace and there was freedom. As often happens when I get these moments of clarity, there's this picture attached to it in my mind. It's just the way that I think about things. And this time I saw this image of a hot air balloon. And I've always loved hot air balloons. I went to a festival as a kid and they were so huge. It was so amazing to me. There's no jet engines or propellers. It's literally just heat. It's an element of nature that defeats gravity, another element of nature, and helps these massive balloons rise to the skies. But this time, instead of seeing a balloon with simply a basket with people in it, they were towing these massive pieces of luggage, trunks and suitcases, and it was this picture of the baggage that we all carry around, the baggage that I had been carrying around, weighing me down, keeping me from living in the freedom that Jesus paid for me to live in. And so this will be my newest piece, a permanent reminder of the freedom that God has given me. You know, I don't control the future, and I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, but I do know that God is in control. And I know that He has a plan for me. I know that He's promised that all things, even the worst things in our life, can work together for our good if we love God and if we are called and sold out to the purpose that He has for us. There is redemption in all parts of our life. There is hope. There is love. There's peace. There's forgiveness. And I know there's a lot of people living with anxiety, and maybe you relate to these restless nights and these panic attacks and the worst case scenarios. Maybe you've been spending years trying to fight your fears. You can experience freedom from your worry, your fear, your uncertainty, and your anxiety, but it starts by getting on the path of humility.